Average is not invited. Not if you're holding your company off-site in Las Vegas. We aren't on friendly terms with the bare minimum, and unenthusiastic is uninvited. Las Vegas's creative energy and world-class hospitality want to bring your company off-site to crazy new heights. That's why fear-based leadership is afraid of Vegas, and boring won't be there, but it will be watching the meeting recordings later. Plan for the extraordinary at vegasmeansbusiness.com.
Hey, Keurig coffee drinkers. Need a cold coffee with a bold flavor? Dunkin' Cold K-Cup pods were specially crafted for cold coffee. Brew over ice straight out of the Keurig coffee maker for smooth, delicious Dunkin' taste you know and love. Find your next Dunkin' Cold coffee in the roasted coffee aisle.
Sometimes your cat can be a mystery, like when they get so attached to certain cardboard boxes. But when you use Fresh Step cat litter, there's no question that you're making your cat happy thanks to amazing odor control. Fresh Step clumping cat litters prevent stinky crumbles and make scooping easy by locking in liquid and odor immediately. That means you can keep your house clean and your bond strong. There's no mystery here. Find Fresh Step cat litter at a store near you. Fresh Step is a registered trademark of the Clorox Pet Products Company. Certain trademarks used under license from the Procter & Gamble Company or its affiliates.
How's it going? And welcome to episode 149 of On the Wire, a proud member of the Pitch List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting is at Hasting Kevin on the Twitter himself. We have another great preview show for you today where we're going to jump around a little bit. We did power last week. We're going to get into some of the pitching categories, namely the ratios, ERA and WHIP, specifically as we preview our 5x5 categories instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, if you will, by position or by teams. So hopefully that is useful, and we'll get right into it in a little bit. But Kevin, glad to have you back with me here. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Hope you're doing well, Adam. I was doing better, actually, until you let me know that on February 1st, we're talking about pitching ratio categories, and my 2024 fantasy season may be over already.
Oh, geez. Yeah, well, you still got some drafts you already are signed up for. Like you can't. There's no turning back there. Well, maybe there is turning
pitching
back.
ratios. Sure. This is such. It really is fun. I'm not just saying that in jest. It is a lot of fun talking about these pitching ratios, but it can also be infuriating at times, for sure.
Well, we could have chased wins, but our guest today wanted to save that for somebody else. So I'll get right into it. We do have some help to talk about these ratios. You probably heard him on many a podcast. That is, of course, we're talking about Eric Samulski. The co-host of, I guess technically host the way Nick puts it, of On the Corner. And of course, you can also find him on the other FSWA finalist, the Roto World Baseball Show. Very few, we're talking about this in the Discord, very few people can say they are nominated twofold in the same category in the FSWA, and Eric and Casey Bubba, they are the two that I can find that have that honor. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us. You just went 2 hours talking to Nick about your top 100. You spent 2 hours the episode before talking about prospect pitchers. So that's kind of our wheelhouse. We can go an hour and a half to 2 hours on a regular basis. So you're going to fit right in. How you doing, man?
I was going to say, do we have a hard out in this one? Like maybe like 145 or something like that?
Give you a break. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'm good. Thank you. I will give the hat tip to Bubba. I obviously didn't jump into On the Corner until after the summer. And I didn't jump into the Roto World Baseball Show until about beginning of July. So all the hosts that came before, I'd say that's as much an Alex Fast nomination as anybody else. But I'm excited to be involved in both of those shows, and I'm excited to be here with you guys chatting about pitching. And you gave me a choice, and I said, "There's just no way I want to talk about chasing wins." Well, so let's do ratios.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, this if anybody is living under a rock in the fantasy baseball Twitterverse, the FSWA finalists for all the categories that they put out were announced a couple of days ago. So make sure you go check out that feed. A lot of great nominees, a lot of great work that's being linked in all of that too. So make sure that if you are, looking up what those nominees are, you're going to read the work, you're listening to the work, and making sure that you're giving them as much of your eyeballs and earballs as you possibly can. Though I will say the podcast of the year, the Pitcher List won that award, I think 2 seasons ago. And we were nominated last year. We're nominated again this year as a finalist. But every year that category has grown. So the first year that we won, I think there were 5. Last year, I'm pretty sure there were 6, and now there's 7. I mean, that's just a testament about how many great podcasts have not only come out but also are sustained. Because obviously there are some stalwarts in that category as well. Obviously, it was Sleeper and the Bust, and Rates and Barrels, and they have some name recognition behind them. But it is amazing that it's just the competition gets that much harder and harder every single season, and you have as much of a chance to at least put your name on something in that category as anybody else, Eric. So you should, you're still part of all that. You should hang your hat on that for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I went to my wife and I probably have to move soon. And I went to look at an apartment, and the landlord was in there before me, and I opened the door and I heard a very familiar sound, and I walked in. He was in the middle of an episode of Rates and Barrels.
Are you serious?
Listening to it on speaker. And so I was like, hey, I know those guys, and we talked about my podcasts, and I'm not going to live in that apartment, but it's just nice to make that connection,
Maybe if he was listening to one of your podcasts,
right, exactly,
it would have made a difference. Yeah.
Come on.
All right. Well, we got a lot of news. I mean, people are whispering all the time that there's nothing's happening. But quite a bit is happening. I think it's just some of the bigger names are still not signed, but there's still lots of stuff to talk about. So let's get into it. Let's get into the biggest things. We're recording this on Thursday evening. And so if you can rewind your brains by the time you're listening to this. So what was happening on Thursday evening? Probably the biggest trade of probably the biggest trade of the offseason, at least with name recognition, happened between the Milwaukee Brewers and the Baltimore Orioles, where the Orioles added to their rotation with one Corbin Burns. They gave up DL Hall, Joey Ortiz, and what I'm reading now, a draft pick, which never happens in baseball. It's actually not allowed. Obviously, there are exceptions to that because they did do it. But Eric, I'm going to let you lead us off here. What is general thoughts all around? This just kind of happened about an hour ago, so hopefully you've had enough time to kind of let it sink in. But first and foremost, Corbin Burns, last year of his, arbitration, last year of his contract, or rookie contract, if you want to call it that, going to be spent in Baltimore. What's his impact on that rotation, and what's the impact on him?
Yeah, I mean, this felt inevitable, right? Or something like this. I mean, everybody looked at Baltimore from the end of the season and even really at the trade deadline last year and said, you have tons of hitting prospects. You don't have enough space for all these hitting prospects. You need an ace. Go get an ace.
Yeah.
And so this makes perfect sense. Listen, it also doesn't hurt that they just changed ownership to people who want to shell out tons of money. And they may be willing to shell out tons of money to keep Burns there as well. So, it is a rental, and I'm sure Scott Boras will want Burns to test the market, but that's not to say that he can't stay in Baltimore. I had Burns as my 4th ranked starter behind Zach Wheeler. And I'll probably bump him up to 3rd. There wasn't a lot separating Wheeler and Burns for me. I think, Burns was really good in the second half of last year. There were actually few pitchers that were better than him. Obviously, we know that he, not long ago was in consideration to be the number 1 starting pitcher in fantasy. He gets a huge park upgrade here. I think he gets a team context upgrade too, because the Brewers were probably, not really going to compete this year, or at least seem to be selling off some parts. And he goes to one of the best teams in the AL. And so I really like that for him. Obviously, the success came from the change in the slider, and so there's no reason to think that the second half success won't carry over. So yeah, I love that, and I think people, generally think the return is light, but I think that's a little bit disrespectful to DL Hall, who was a well-regarded prospect. Not long ago, has battled some injuries, obviously, but he was a good prospect. Joey Ortiz is the 63rd ranked prospect, and then you're getting the 34th overall pick in the draft. And obviously depends on how well you draft, but that could turn into another really good player. They get 6 years of Ortiz and DL Hall. That's a long time.
Yeah, this is I agree. I think name recognition alone, like your sticker shock was like, oh, that's it. Because if you follow Alex Fast, because you are, he's talking about the Orioles should be going after Cease because Dylan Cease of the White Sox. That's just who's on the market. There's a great video that was on Twitter today about with Alex Anthopoulos of Atlanta responding to a fan outside a radio show saying, we tried to get Cease. He was too expensive. Yeah. So obviously that prompted Alex Fast to say, well, I wonder if they really were asking for Jackson Holiday for Cease. Like that was what the price would have been. This price is much different than that. And granted, you would have gotten a little bit more control over Dylan Cease rather than the 1 year of Corbin Burns, but it still seems kind of right in line with like the talent that you're getting versus the length that you're getting him. And to your point, Eric, Baltimore's got the flexibility in their roster to do this. Like you said, they've got plenty of young hitters. They don't have enough places to play them. At least that's where Joe Ortiz comes in. And DL Hall, I'm not sure Baltimore knew what they were going to be doing with DL Hall anyway.
And who knows what Milwaukee will do?
That would be my next question. Yeah,
a rotation with DL Hall and Aaron Ashby both in it is exciting and scary, and not in like I'm a hitter and I'm scared. Maybe I'm a hitter and I'm scared because I don't know where the ball's going to go. But it just in terms of like the variance in those guys is wild. But they're two, still relatively young lefties who have really good raw stuff. DL Hall in particular, Nick and I spoke about him on a few of the podcasts when we talked about prospect pitchers or late round pitchers, because he was a guy who the Orioles said they still viewed him as a starter long term. He viewed himself as a starter, and he got off to a rough start last year due to a back injury, but actually mentioned that he thought it made him a better pitcher overall because he kind of lost velocity early in the year and had to learn how to throw his secondaries and command them and throw them and sequence them better. And then he got the velocity back in the second half of the year, and he looked really good out of the bullpen. So I think that the Brewers will give him every chance to start. There's really no reason why he and Ashby can't be in the rotation, because those spots are currently held down by Joe Ross and Colin Ray, and that shouldn't hold them out.
Yeah, sure.
It depends on how they perform in the spring, how far DL Hall, how much he's actually built up. And then Ortiz, listen, Willy Adames was in trade rumors in the offseason. Joey Ortiz is a very good defensive shortstop. He hits the ball really hard. He doesn't really pull and lift the ball, so he's not going to be a major home run threat. But, he hits the ball hard enough that he could hit 15 home runs in that park. And if he's going to play well above average defensive shortstop, maybe the next trade piece is Willy Adames, and the Brewers look to fill a need somewhere else.
Yeah, as somebody who has already drafted plenty of Jackson Holiday and just drafted him about 3 hours ago, I'm not opposed to this trade. And not that Joey Ortiz was the one holding him back, right, but he's still one less speed bump. A defensive, like you said, a defensive shortstop who's going to play the position. Passan was very clear in his tweet that, he's a shortstop, which obviously starts the rumor mill restarts the rumor mill with Willy Adames possibly on the way out in Milwaukee, as it was already being speculated that they were willing to trade anything not nailed down on a long-term deal. And so we'll see what happens there. All right, Kevin, we've got another slew of giant news to talk about. So this is what I was going to lead off the show with, because I think it is worth, kind of lumping them all together. We talk about them in spurts every week, but we got a lot of minor league contracts happening in the last week, and worth just kind of listing them all off. And I want you to tell me, is there any one of these that you see being a stab at in a DC that, they could fight their way into, any kind of roster battle? We got the Milwaukee, before making this trade, they signed Christian Arroyo to a minor league deal. So another, middle infielder to fight for time with Joey Ortiz and Bryce Turang and everybody else. Matt Duffy and Jared Walsh, they signed minor league deals with the Texas Rangers. Carlos Carrasco is going back to Cleveland on a minor league deal. Cole Tucker and Nick Solak, they signed minor league deals with Seattle. And then Greg Allen with the Yankees, a minor league deal of his own. These are all names at one point or another. They were, worth talking about. Some a little bit more than others. Obviously, they're all on minor league deals. Nobody has a guarantee contract at a major league level. But did any of them find a way to sign with a situation where they could, find their way into relevancy again?
Probably not. But, Christian Arroyo can always find his way to plate appearances with his defense. We've seen that in the past. We saw it with Boston. Matt Duffy did get a little bit of playing time with Kansas City last season. I don't see him getting a whole lot with Texas. Jared Walsh is very intriguing, but I am afraid that, 10 years from now, we're just going to still be wondering what could have been with Jared Walsh and all of the injuries. But he's the guy I'm most interested in keeping an eye on throughout the spring and see what happens with the injury. I don't expect a whole lot from Carrasco, even back in Cleveland, of course. We'll keep an eye on him. Cole Tucker and Nick Solak in Seattle. Greg Allen in New York, probably not much, but these are all guys that probably at some point throughout the season we're going to talk about, Adam, depending on matchups they have for that week, other things going on with the lineups. But I don't see anything here that really piques my interest at all, other than as I would have if he was still in LA, I would be keeping an eye on Jared Walsh. I'm just afraid those injuries took too big of a toll on his entire career, but he is still worth monitoring.
I'm happy to see Carrasco get a chance with his old team. That seems nice. I think the one that kind of stands out the most as being more of a possibility is exactly the team we were just talking about. That's Christian Arroyo with Milwaukee, just because the opportunity, there's more likely to be an opportunity there in some capacity, whether it be through an injury or through another couple trades. And that'll be somebody that Milwaukee could, maybe prop up a little bit and throw in a trade at the deadline if he's on the major league roster. So they might have more, there might be more of an assumption there that they could give him a little bit of extra playing time if, he doesn't fall flat on his face. Eric, all right. Well, Matt Duffy and Jared Walsh, they went to Texas. Walsh is the one you're interested in a little bit, Kevin. But Texas is making other moves at the major league level, and that was signing David Robertson. This happened right after we recorded our last episode, so we're finally getting around to talking about this one. David Robertson signs a 1-year deal, while Hector Neris signs a 1-year deal of his own with the Chicago Cubs. So a couple of relievers who have a little bit of one more experience than the others at the back end of games, but they still both have had some time in the ninth. Do either one of these relievers supplant the assumed closers of Jose Leclerc in Texas or Adbert Alzolay in Chicago?
I think no is the easy answer. It's more complicated in Texas. I would say I don't believe Neris supplants Alzolay. I think that Alzolay was really good out of the bullpen for the Cubs. Most people, when he was a starting pitching prospect, had said, hey, you really don't have a deep enough arsenal. Like you're bound to be a reliever. And he was really good as a reliever. Like, yes, he doesn't have, you're not going to see like the 30+% strikeout rate, on a consistent basis. I know he flashed it a little bit in 2022. You're not going to see that out of him like you do from some high end, closers, but I think that his stuff is good. I think that he has proven, to be adept at, handling more than 3 outs if needed. And I don't think there's really any reason for the Cubs to remove him from that role. I don't think he loses it. I think he's good enough. Leclerc, I also don't think is immediately removed from the role. I want to compare him to a cockroach, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to him, but I mean he doesn't go away. And there's a reason why he doesn't go away. It's the Rangers obviously believe in him, right? They believe in who he is as a pitcher, what he can do. Last year, adding in that cutter was really a good thing for him because it tunnels really well with the slider. It's got 7 miles an hour difference. So the cutter actually became a really nice swing and miss pitch for him. The question for him has always been, can he throw strikes? And so Robertson, I think, gives flexibility in case Leclerc is unable to throw strikes. The interesting thing about Robertson, which, before I started working at NBC Sports and Roto World, I was working at a local New York paper. And so I covered the Mets a lot and was in the locker room a lot before Robertson got traded. And he talked pretty openly about how, the Mets basically said, hey, we know that you have reverse splits through your career, and so we might be using you in some instances where to get really tough lefties out. And Robertson had basically said, I just want to win. I don't really care how I'm used. And so I'm remembering those interviews and thinking that applies perfectly to this situation in Texas. I don't think that he is the closer at the start. I think that they'll use him in multiple situations. And the fact that over his career, he's done very well against lefties means that he can kind of fill the role that Chapman had in a sense, because, they lost Will Smith too. So it's just Brock Burke in the bullpen as a lefty for the Rangers. So Robertson gives them another flexibility to attack left-handed hitters late in games.
Yeah, I mean, if only the Rangers still had, a very solid lefty in their arsenal. I don't know what they would have done with him. But yeah, I mean, to rewind all the way back to Alzolay, I'm always in my head, I have Sarah Sanchez talking to me about how electric Alzolay is, not only as a player and out of the bullpen, but the fact that the Cubs made an entrance video and he has entrance music already produced as a closer. Not every closer on every team has that. I think people take that for granted with Mariano Rivera and then, Tony Trump and the trumpets in New York for Diaz. Not every closer has that kind of following within their team, and the fact that he had such a short period of time and in the second half of the season in that role, and he already has that. That tells me that job is pretty much his. And that's just science. And I also think about how Robertson just kind of fell apart when he went to Miami at the end of last year, and he got taken out of that role pretty quickly. They traded for him to be the closer, and that failed completely and utterly. And it just makes me think that I love the fact that you referenced those, his interviews while he was with the Mets and saying, hey, I don't need to be the closer. I just want to win, and I want to, use me however you feel is going to be the best way. And yeah, so that doesn't, definitely doesn't show me that, they signed him to be the closer. They just signed him to be useful.
Yeah, I think I remember him being pretty vocal about not loving the situation in Miami, uprooting his family in the middle of the year. This is, a 38, 39-year-old who, has kind of established playing, in a particular market in particular. And so I think the idea that he's signing this 1-year deal with Texas is he wants to be there. And I got the sense that a lot of the performance on the field with Miami was that maybe he didn't fully love that setup.
I can't imagine many players love being uprooted in the middle of the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when you've been in a place for as long as he had. Yeah.
Right. And when you have kids and family, all that, we sometimes forget about that. And we're like, oh, he fell apart. It's I wonder why he fell apart. And nothing could have led to that.
Yeah. There's only one thing on your mind, and there's nothing else happening outside of that stadium. Yeah, sure. All right. Well, let's see, Kevin, we'll move into the outfield here, where Jock Peterson finds a new home in Arizona, joining their outfield possibly part-time. Maybe he's DH. We'll see what kind of role he kind of carves out there. What do you expect out of Peterson in the desert?
I'm expecting a strong side of a platoon as the DH in the heart of the lineup. I like it. He pretty much taken over for Tommy Pham. Going to take that spot. The outfield is full. They got Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Corbin Carroll. Their outfield is set. They have Alec Thomas going to be in center as well. But I think the way this roster sits right now in Arizona, Jock Peterson, strong side platoon, pretty strictly. We know his history, as amazing as he can be versus righties. He has not performed well versus lefties, and there were teams that tried, right? The Cubs tried to give him a lot of extra plate appearances. He wasn't absolutely horrible. He's just never going to be the guy against left-handed pitching. So yeah, I like this move. Good landing spot. Good. I think it fits a need for Arizona. They did need somebody to replace Tommy Pham in the lineup. And yeah, this looks great as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what he does, right? He is Tommy Pham, his replacement in Arizona. Yeah, they were definitely.
How funny though is it that he's basically replacing Tommy Pham after their history?
Oh, geez. That's more than appropriate. Yes. Yeah. We'll see how many fantasy football leagues there are in Arizona, and see how that works out. But yeah, I mean, we talked about Jock Peterson probably all the way back in our first season. Just, you're right. He definitely has some very strong splits. He has had seasons where he's done you more harm playing more often than good. And so being on the strong side of platoon, yeah, you hear that, you see that, and your instinct is like, oh, well, he's going to lose playing time. He's not going to get as much playing time. He's not going to get any bats. But you know what? He's still probably going to put up the same numbers, and your ratios are going to thank you later in that situation when he's just facing off against the side that he does better at. So maybe you'll be happy if you're in a weekly league and you put him in your lineup and he sits 2 or 3 games. It's rare that you can say that about most of your players in your lineup, but if you're going to actually hurt my team by being in the lineup, I'd rather take the 0 on that day for sure. All right, Eric, we got this note I had to make. I had to change it a couple times because we actually got an update here. Trey Cabbage, he was DFA'd earlier in the week by the Angels. So my question was going to be like, hey, where does he go? Can he find a place where he can, take advantage and show off what he did in 2023 between AAA and Major Leagues in Anaheim? Why did the Angels cut him? Yada, yada, yada. And then lo and behold, he got traded like 2 or 3 days later while he was still, being designated. And he's going to end up in Houston, where the Houston Astros traded him for Carlos Espinoza, right-handed pitcher there. I'm not less worried about Espinoza, but I am curious to know, did he find the right place to actually find a chance to replicate what he did at AAA and the major leagues, mostly at AAA, granted 26-year-old season, still put up a lot of power, hit the ball all over the place, and made a name for himself. We were talking about him for Fab Bibs when he got called up, just based on the name alone. How do you pass that up? But can he do that in Houston?
Yeah, I wrote about Cabbage a lot last year because I was doing like a minor league leaderboard article, and obviously he was just all over it. And yeah, I mean, I took to Twitter when, as we do, we just take to Twitter and share our thoughts. But I was surprised that the Angels let him go because it's a team that wasn't really contending. And so even though there are flaws in Trey Cabbage's game, it's like he just went 30-30 in the minors and hit 306, and you're not competing. Why wouldn't you let him get a chance for at bats? And the answer to that is coming up later, and who they'd rather give at bats to. So yes, this is a good landing spot for him in the sense that this is an organization that I think will get the most out of his set of skills because it's a well-run organization that will be able to kind of optimize what he does well. He is not a 30, 300 hitter at the major league level. I think most people probably knew that. But anybody who's going to strike out over 30% of the time in AAA, and then if you include his stints at AA, I mean, he's a 35, 36% strikeout rate hitter. That's an issue. He was much better coming over to the Angels starting in 2022. He had been a Minnesota Twins prospect before that. So the Angels found something that got another level out of him, and that can't be ignored. He does have a good power speed foundation. So there's a chance that even if he's a 230 hitter at the major league level, that he's able to give you decent fantasy production from a power and speed standpoint. I think the most likely path for him is it's like him versus John Singleton as the left-handed bench bat for opening day, right? John Singleton is a tremendous story. Everybody was pulling for him last year. He's going to be 33 this year, and he hit 165 in his 105 plate appearances with the Astros last year. Sorry, that was across his two teams that he played in Major League Baseball last year. So if Cabbage shows up and looks good, I think that's a position where the Astros could say, okay, you're a backup first baseman, you're a backup outfielder, you're a left-hand bench bat. And then is there a path to more playing time? I think potentially, like in the outfield. I mean, Chas McCormick can play a good enough center field that if Jake Myers isn't looking great and Trey Cabbage is, you could see Cabbage mix in the outfield and they shift McCormick to center. I just think that realistically Cabbage's ceiling is probably, a bench bat who gets mixed in because he's a lefty, 2-3 starts a week max. But I think it's a good gamble for the Astros.
Yeah, I mean, and he's in this position where he's an injury away from a little bit more playing time. If not regular playing time, at least a little bit more. And,
it's not like the Astros have a big left-handed slugger who frequently gets injured or anything.
Never happens. Yeah, we won't go down that road. Let's close this out a little bit because, as you alluded to, the Angels did fill the gap. As soon as they DFA'd Trey Cabbage, they signed Aaron Hicks to kind of fill that roster spot, I guess. Aaron Hicks in Anaheim. Anaheim's only paying the minimum here because he's still on the hook for what the Yankees were paying him. Can Hicks, talk about somebody who obviously can't stay healthy. Can he do anything in Anaheim, or is this just like Aaron Hicks being Aaron Hicks?
It's just Aaron Hicks being Aaron Hicks to me. Like his stats were much better in Baltimore over the final 65 games. But like when you look at everything under the hood, it was basically the exact same in terms of pull rates, strikeout rates, walk rates, barrel rates, all that stuff was like basically exactly the same as earlier on in the year. The Angels, they're not going to compete, but they want to try to block either Mickey Moniak or Joe Adele from getting regular bats by bringing in Aaron Hicks. Okay, whatever you want to do.
But they won't sell the team. No. All right. No. All right. We got a couple more news items to get to. I'm a little late to the buzzer on this one, but we do have to take a quick break.
Hey, parents. Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list, teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
Have you found the keys to unlock your best trip? On a Trafalgar tour, you unlock more than just the world. We give you the keys to discover real connections and one-of-a-kind experiences. It all starts with expert itineraries where everything is taken care of. With Trafalgar, your money goes further, and so do you. Unlock your best self. Discover more at Trafalgar.com/unlock. That's TRAFALGAR.com/unlock.
All right, Kevin, I can't literally this whole offseason, I can't do an outline without mentioning a move that your Kansas City Royals did. It's not possible. They have to be one of the most active teams on the market this offseason. This not always the flashiest move, but there's still a move worth talking about. Adam Frazier joins your Royals. Tell me your overall thoughts on this in general, and how does whose playing time is he taking, and what is he doing in Kansas City?
Well, right now this is for depth. They had been talking about signing a left-handed utility infielder and left-handed hitting utility infielder. They have that in Adam Frazier. I just don't think they're going to need him for long. I really don't. Garrett Hampson is going to be their right-handed utility infielder, and probably play against some lefties once in a while as well. And I'm still really big on Nick Lofton, who will start the season at AAA, presumably, but I think could be up early and get a lot of playing time on the infield for the Kansas City Royals. Adam Frazier had a great 2024. I don't know if people realize how nice of a 2024 Adam Frazier had because he was a utility player, right? In Baltimore. But the most RBI of his career in 455 plate appearances. And he's had over 600 plate appearances 3 times in his career. 13 home runs, career high by pretty comfortable margin, especially when factoring the plate appearances. So, with those nice low strikeout rates, decent walk rates, and the defense he provides, it's possible he works his way into something here. He's definitely on my radar in draft and holds, whether it's Kansas City or somewhere else. If this doesn't work out, he will end up getting playing time somewhere for somebody, at least part-time as a utility guy, roughly 400 plate appearances. We'll see that somewhere. So after the season he had last year, continuing to walk at over 7%, keeping the strikeouts down in the mid-teens, he's going to provide some value for a draft and hold team, our 50-round, 15-team leagues. But I don't see anything full-time, especially in Kansas City. If things go really, really bad in Kansas City, then it's still not going to be him. It would be Garrett Hampson taking over for Michael Massey, or Garrett Hampson going to third base, and we need Nick Lofton coming up. I think this is a big-time depth move, and he'll be useful. He'll be a great, I think, real baseball player for Kansas City if things are going well for them in 2024. But I don't think he's going to have a whole lot of fantasy value other than in late rounds of a draft and hold, because he will get some plate appearances throughout the year.
Yeah, I think you feel like you were saying the same thing about Frazier last year in Baltimore. Is like he's not long for this roster. He spent the whole, he ended up being on the roster for the whole season. Didn't get moved. And I venture to guess that we were saying the same things when, in his he did end up being traded in 2021, but in Seattle as well. He spent the whole season there as well. It just seemed like these 1-year deals, he was just destined to be, fodder at the trade deadline. It just hasn't happened. So I wonder if, he goes down the same path. He ends up being more useful to Kansas City down the stretch than he would get on the trade market as well. So
if that's the case, things are going well for Kansas City, I believe.
Exactly.
Because otherwise we'll see some more younger players getting a chance in that spot. So that's the hope.
There you go. All right, Eric, last pitch. No, not the last pitcher move we're going to talk about, but one of the last ones. Alex Wood, he goes across the bay, signing with Oakland. Maybe they're Vegas, maybe they're in Reno, Salt Lake City. I'm not quite sure. I don't think they're not sure yet either. But either way, they're going to be he's going to be pitching for the Athletics wherever they end up playing. I assume he's, in the starting rotation for Athletics. I'm pretty sure you'd be in the starting rotation for the Athletics if they signed you. But what, is there, and we're not talking about chasing wins. You didn't want to talk about chasing wins. So I want to make sure I gave you the Athletics pitcher conversation. Overall thoughts on Alex Wood for the A's?
Yeah, in deeper formats, I could see it. I think he's maybe the second best pitcher in the rotation, depending on your thoughts on Paul Blackburn. And look, like we've seen we've seen him be pretty good, in particular, like after he went to the Giants and they made some changes to the pitch mix. I didn't love, he was good in 2021. The underlying metrics suggested he should have been much better in 2022. Sierra, XFIP, all that kind of stuff were well below his ERA. I didn't love what I saw from him last year, but he was in and out of the rotation. He was a reliever. He was a whatever. I don't think you're going to see the innings limits on him that you saw with the Giants. What are the, who are the Athletics saving him for? So I think that, you're going to get some rough starts, and I think you're going to get some starts where you get, 5-6 innings of 2 runs and, maybe 4 or 5 strikeouts. And so I think like he's still in a really good home park. So I think he becomes a deep league streamer where, you could pitch him in favorable parks against lineups that are not particularly daunting, and not really chase wins as much as, just chasing kind of like, ratios to a certain extent, which we'll talk later is a tough thing to stream for. But I'm watching, I'm intrigued because I want to see if he's capable of going deeper into games than the Giants let him, or if that was basically all he had. Because if he starts going 6 innings more consistently, it's a little more interesting for deeper formats than if he's still just a 5-inning guy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody's talked about how the Giants utilized their pitchers last year, especially, specifically Wood and Minaya always comes up in conversation as far as, well, once they find a new home, they get a new contract. How's their new team? Are they going to be utilizing them in the same way? And now they're both in new environments. So it'll be interesting to see not only how they get used, but also if the Giants continue kind of doing what they do with those types of pitchers, or they're not super confident in, how long they can go into games or how long they can hold up throughout the course of the season in their roles. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's not really a reason to hold him back. If I'm not mistaken, this was a 1-year deal as well. So if nothing else, this is an Alex Wood prove it deal to hopefully he can actually, he went to a team where they were like, yeah, fine, we'll let you pitch. Right. If you break down, what to do. Exactly. We'll see. Kevin, we've gotten a couple of we had the one Jackson Chourio mega deal, pre debut deal. Now we get a new one with Detroit with Colt Keith signing an extension with the Tigers. He is now assumed to be the starting second baseman on opening day, according to friend of the site, Jeff Passan. I love that I can say that after his interview at PitchCon. He comes into the season with, third base eligibility. He's third baseman by trade. But Passan at least thinks he's going to, move over to second base somewhat permanently. So he should gain that dual eligibility, in NFBC leagues with the corner and middle infielder spots. That plays a big role. He should get that in short order. How far does this news move him up your board, especially in a NFBC style roster, where you've got the extra corner, you've got the extra middle infielder and a short bench. So, at least Keith is probably going to be on the opening day roster in some capacity.
Yeah, I agree with the speculation of most. I think that he's probably going to get in there nearly every day at second base for Detroit. He's a prospect I have been excited about over the past couple of years. I'm anxious to see him. I like what I see. I think the strikeout rates, walk rates, all great. And here's the problem. Detroit, we've seen this with a lot of players, right? Just that ballpark, it is not conducive to power. And Colt Keith does not have much speed. So the power is what we're looking for. 27 home runs, 88 runs scored, over 100 RBI across AA and AAA last season in less than 600 plate appearances. Only 3 stolen bases. Only 4 stolen bases in 2022. He's never had over 4 stolen bases in a professional season. We're not going to see him run. So we need to see the power. And this ballpark is just not conducive to that. That going back the other way again may help us out. That's going to keep the price suppressed, I presume. I think this is a guy that's going to be available on some waiver wires, even drafts that have not taken place yet. Yes, he has begun to be drafted earlier in some leagues, but it's still going, well after pick 300. He has been taken inside the top 300, presumably since the signing took place. It's hard to tell because we don't know when the draft started. We only know it's only listed after the draft ends. But he has moved up, being drafted outside the top 300 and going right around there and a little inside it over the last handful of drafts. So he's still going to be available. Now, he's only been drafted in half of the online championships that have been drafted so far. I don't think his price is going to skyrocket as much as a typical top prospect who signs a contract locking him up and means we presume to see him in the lineup on opening day. I don't know that he's going to move up as far as other players that may do the same thing with the team context, with the ballpark. And I think that gives us an opportunity here. It's keeping his costs a little lower than with other players like this. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to count on those home runs due to the ballpark, due to he's still only 20 years old. We can't forget that either. But overall, I really like Colt Keith. I think it appears, and I believe this will play out. I think expectations will be tempered, as I said, than with many other prospects. So that's going to help. But he could still be a valuable player in deeper leagues.
Yeah, of course, everybody's going to think about, how Spencer Torkelson came up and, kind of puttered along for his first season in Detroit for the exact same, all the reasons that you mentioned. Colt Keith is definitely somebody that I've been super interested in like my dynasty league. I did not have an opportunity to draft him in our like minor league system. So I jumped at the chance in our current listener league. I think it was in the 20th round. Of course, this is one of our 12 teamers. So this was a little earlier than you're seeing in ADP. So I wasn't afraid to kind of jump him up. It's that dual eligibility and the fact that he's going to play every day. He's going to get the opportunity to, if nothing else, volume his way into the situation. The Tigers hopefully will give him as much support and as much runway as possible. And even that late, even at like 230, 240 overall in a 12-teamer, that's a situation where maybe he gets slotted into your starting lineup at that point at the very end, but he's as much of a bench player draft pick at that point in a 12-teamer than as anything else. So, of course, in the shallower leagues, you can take more risk. You can take more, the shots in the dark on those situations, especially in a fab situation rather than in a, draft champion or draft and hold as well. So, it's going to, matter where you take them based on the format and how you've built your roster and how comfortable you feel about that.
Yeah, really quick clarification for you there, Adam. You mentioned dual eligibility. If people are looking at that and questioning it, he's going to be eligible at third base right away, as that's the position he played most at in the minors. And we're all expecting him to gain second base eligibility as soon as he plays enough games, as soon as the Tigers even play enough games for him to do so. So that's where that's coming from, if people are wondering.
Yeah, probably not until the second full week of the season, if he plays every day at second base to get those 10 games under his belt. All right, let's move out of Detroit. Eric, we'll go over the border to Toronto. They add Justin Turner to their lineup on a 1-year deal for the Blue Jays. Where does Turner play for the Blue Jays, and what kind of impact is his presence going to have on their current lineup?
Yeah, I think obviously to me he slots in as the starting DH. I think his ability to play third and first, and also looked pretty good at second for the Red Sox at times last year. I think he can be a backup infielder for them if they need to give Davis Schneider or Kevin Biggio or Vlad a day off, or let Turner play first one game, let Vlad DH, just to rest the legs or whatever. But I think he's their primary DH. I think he slots in the middle of the lineup. I think that he remains probably like a 20 homer bat. I think there might be some potential home run growth, because as you know, with Fenway Park, sometimes Fenway turns home runs into line drives off the wall, depending on how hard a ball is hit. But I did a pulled fly ball article that's coming out soon for the Roto World draft guide, and saw that Turner hit over 700 on his pulled fly balls. Obviously, the vast majority of his home runs were pulled fly balls. So I think the batting average might suffer a little bit, because obviously pulled fly balls are going to be easier to land for hits in Fenway, given how short the wall is, versus Toronto. Toronto obviously changed the dimensions of their park, which makes it slightly less hitter friendly. But listen, I mean, Turner has been like a 270, 20 homer, 25 homer bat over the last 3 years, and he is a professional hitter. He will, he has started to pull a lot more when he got to Fenway. So I think, to me, that shows he's a hitter who will adapt to his environment. I don't think he has major thump anymore. So, I think you're going to get something around 270, 20, and that's great, because Toronto needed another bat. I still don't think this lineup is as great as everybody thinks it is. And so I think that this helps. I don't think that it makes them contend with, some of the other teams in the AL East. I think this biggest knock here is on Danny Jansen, because now Danny Jansen's best path to playing time is splitting at bats with Alejandro Kirk behind the plate, which also dings Alejandro Kirk a little bit, because we know that Danny Jansen can get hot with the bat. And if he does, then maybe Kirk isn't catching as much during those times. And it will depend, obviously, on what the Blue Jays do at third base. Do they trust Turner and his foot, which, he ended the year last year playing through a serious foot injury. Toronto is a turf field. So that's tough for that kind of foot injury. Do they trust a 39-year-old Justin Turner to be an everyday third baseman? If they do, then okay, maybe Danny Jansen gets more DH at bats. But I don't necessarily believe that's the case. So I think it's a knock to the catchers, a slight uptick in run production maybe for some of the guys hitting at the top of the lineup. And I don't think that Turner is really impacted much from, I don't think he gets a major boost from last year, but he was a good hitter last year. And I think he remains a good corner infield target who will have, in most leagues, I think should probably have first base and maybe even second base eligibility. I don't know if in NFBC formats he played enough games at second, but in other formats, I believe he did. I'm going to talk as I scroll down on Fangraphs to see that, he had 10 starts at second base. So I believe like ESPN, Yahoo, those formats, he'll have second base eligibility, but not in NFBC formats.
Yeah. Of course. Yahoo being the one that everybody will point to. You only need 5 starts in 10 appearances at a position. So yeah, he'll get that, and then anything else he looks the wrong way at. Turner in NFBC going into the year just has the single eligibility at first base. I see a path where he gains third base eligibility though with Toronto for all the reasons you said. He goes, they're obviously not bringing back Matt Chapman. Kevin Biggio right now is kind of slotted in as a third baseman. So it might take a while, but I think that he kind of does enough to get into that position. Like you said, though, second base is not off the table either. We talked about David Schneider last week, Kevin, but he's not, exactly the pinnacle of a non-platoon player with what he did last year as well. So they've got a couple, and I mentioned this every other episode. Of course, they've got a couple of minor league infielders that are kind of knocking on the door with Barter and or Elvis Martinez that can kind of fill in those gaps as well. But yeah, I mean, right now in NFBC, that single eligibility first base is as deep as everybody's talking about it is. He's still not. He shouldn't be off the radar because of what he's been able to do in Boston. And Toronto's, maybe the wall changes a little bit, but still plays up in general for hitters. So we'll see kind of if he can take advantage of that, or if he gets, he's just got used to that wall, because that wall can really mess with hitters and fielders. You get too used to it and you go somewhere else, you're you got to make some adjustments. All right, let's go. Another trade that happened a couple days ago, Kevin. We got Seattle acquiring Jorge Polanco from the Minnesota Twins. They send off recently acquired Anthony DeSclafani, along with Justin Topa and a couple other prospects. Seattle also brings on Samad Taylor from your Kansas City Royals for money in a bag of balls, apparently. Samad Taylor, Jorge Polanco, Cole Tucker, we talked about earlier, Nick Solak on minor league deals, and then Dylan Moore. They're all kind of competing for second base time in Seattle now. I mean, or is this just Polanco's job and you're not worried about anybody else?
Not worried about it. I think for the most part, this is Polanco's job. Even better yet, according to Roster Resource, and I don't see a lot to argue with here, that they have him hitting third in this lineup. So all of a sudden we have a guy being drafted near pick 300 in drafts that have taken place so far this offseason, hitting third behind J.P. Crawford and Julio Rodriguez, in front of Mitch Garver and Kyle Raleigh, a couple guys with power there, and going this late in drafts. And we've talked all offseason about, I really buy into Nick's, you have to have a plan for second base when you go into a draft. And I'm not so sure one of those very viable plans can be, I'll get Jorge Polanco in the 20th round. I'd be more than happy with that here. All of the projection systems, more and more of them out by the day now, including a new version of PLV projections. We have all kinds of projections to be looking at now. They all have Polanco for over 20 home runs, approaching double-digit stolen bases, decent batting average, and where he's going to creep up a little bit. He signed, but he already had began to creep up. He already had crept up little by little as we're getting later in the off season, knowing that he would sign somewhere. So I don't see a big jump here, and I like this landing spot a lot for Polanco.
Yeah, I like the fact that, approaching that double-digit stolen base mark that you mentioned with him. I wonder if batting third in that lineup with Raleigh and Garver behind him maybe holds him back a little bit in those scenarios, knowing that these guys' bats are right behind them. They can just knock them along without taking the risk. But at the same time, Seattle has not been shy on the base pass in general over the last couple of years, last year included. So they could balance, those two factors could just end up balancing each other out as well. So, I mean, if he's playing every day at second base in the heart of the lineup, regardless of team context, of course, everybody thinks about Seattle being more of a pitcher's park than a hitter's park, going from Minnesota to Seattle. That's going to play a role. But Polanco isn't necessarily like, it's nice to see him get 20 bombs, but you're not thinking of Polanco as a power hitter whose power is going to be sapped based on the park that he's playing in per se. Maybe he, cuts down from 20 to 18. This is back of the napkin math. This isn't based on any actual science here. But at the same time, that's the least of my worries, especially if he's getting an upgrade in the lineup spot as well. He also needs to play every day. I mean, he needs to play all season for that matter, and not let any kind of injuries kind of get in the way as well. All right. Last thing we're going to hit on here, Eric, before we get to the actual main topic here, isn't a signing. It's not a trade. It's just one of those things you start seeing in, once February hits or right before February hits, before pitchers and catchers report, we start getting more and more news about players having mystery surgeries or injuries that they've been dealing with that nobody knew about because nobody's knocking on their door interviewing guys in the offseason. But Corey Seager was reportedly had surgery to repair a sports hernia. In the quote, and I don't have the tweet in front of me, but of course it said could be ready for opening day. That's the key word here, not should, but could. Maybe he needs maybe even if he's ready for opening day, maybe he needs a little bit of ramp time, maybe, extended spring training to get ready for the spring. I'm speculating here, obviously. But what's your over thoughts on Seager and this kind of news? What does it do for his draft capital if you were to, be in that situation where you could draft him now? Are you not worried about it, or are you taking this into consideration?
Yeah, I think, I tweeted about this the other day because some people were like, Corey Seager off my board. And it's like, well, why would he be off your board? I know he isn't in, he's had back injuries in the past. He's had injuries. I will certainly move him down because I don't think he's ready for opening day. The tweet the tweet for the Royals, or the Royals report, was that they're hopeful he'll be ready for opening day. But he had surgery on the 30th. The things that I was reading both on Twitter and in just Google searching for like actual medical doctors was that a sports hernia surgery typically takes 6 to 12 weeks to recover from. The season is 8 weeks away. So yes, hopeful that he'll be ready because 8 weeks does fall within that 6 to 12 week time frame. But why are you taking arguably your best player and forcing him to come back on the earlier side of a recovery from something like a sports hernia, where think of the torque that when you're swinging a bat, right? Like that is all hips. You don't want any potential for re-injury or any kind of you need to make sure that you're fully healed from that. And again, because of the nature of where the sports hernia surgery is, it's not like, he got his surgery on his foot and then he could just sit in a chair and still get some dry swings in with his hands. Like he's not really going to be swinging for a while, so he's going to need to build up. And so we've seen Ezekiel Duran fill in for players around the infield multiple times before. I think the Rangers are probably comfortable with him doing that for a while. So if Seager misses the first 2 weeks to a month of the season, it wouldn't surprise me. Remember, this is a team that signed Tyler Mahle in the offseason, who's not going to be ready for the summer anyway. They have Scherzer, DeGrom, all basically coming back at some point over the summer, possibly, right? All within air quotes. So, I don't think the Rangers feel any sort of pressure that they have to have the best month of April of any team in baseball. So I would move him down. I'm still happy to take him because I think there's enough depth at shortstop where I can cover the position for, let's call it, a month. And then I don't see any reason why I wouldn't get typical Corey Seager back, especially because he never gave you speed. So as long as he's recovered enough that the torque in the hips will still allow him to kind of open up through the ball and hit for the same amount of power, then knock a month off his plate appearance projections, which probably factored in an injury anyway, and then go from there.
I just love the fact that baseball players can get sports hernias instead of just hernias, and they get a specific title. I've only had 2 surgeries in my life. One of them was to get my wisdom teeth out, and technically that is surgery, so I'm going to count it. And the other one was a surgery to repair a hernia. I cannot claim that was a sports hernia, and I am upset about that now. That would be a lot cooler of a story. So I wish him, Corey Seager, that is, a fast recovery. And yeah, I agree that this is not something that any team, never mind the defending champions, are going to be pushing him, further along any faster than he needs to be. Kevin, you and I talk about, some teams take care of their injuries in their rehab assignments better than others. I'm hoping that the Rangers kind of fit into that better category for the sake of, Corey Seager and all these guys that Eric, you just mentioned, that are be coming back throughout the course of the season for the Rangers. All right. Finally, we have wrapped up all we need to talk about with news. I'm looking at the wire here, and I'm not seeing anything new come through, so it is safe to move on. But we do have to take another quick break.
At Arizona State University, we offer a wide variety of degree programs online to match all kinds of interests and career aspirations. Programs that are taught by the same notable faculty who teach on campus and designed using innovative technology to improve learning outcomes and equip you for post-graduation success. That's why 87% of ASU online graduates indicated they were promoted at work or received an increase in salary after earning their degree. Find your program at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hey parents, Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list, teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
Have you found the keys to unlock your best trip? On a Trafalgar tour, you unlock more than just the world. We give you the key to let down your walls and make lifelong friends. The key to discovering hidden talents and fresh perspectives. From one-of-a-kind experiences to iconic destinations, Trafalgar gives you the keys to unlock your best self. Discover more at trafalgar.com/unlock. That's TRAFALGAR.com/unlock. Tour differently.
All right, we are back. We are still listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, joined by Kevin Hasting, and we are lucky enough to be joined by Eric Samulski, co-host of On the Corner and the Roto World Baseball Show, both nominated for FSWA awards. Eric, take this time, though, in the middle of the show, not the beginning, not the end, at the middle of the show, to kind of let everybody else know what else you're doing. You kind of mentioned, obviously you're working on articles for the Roto World draft guide. What else? Where else can they find your work? What else are you working on?
Yeah, so thanks. I will tweet out basically everything. So that's again at Samsky NYC. So that's the best place to find any of the work that I do. The Roto World online draft guide is dropping next week. So that's definitely something to check out. Projections, articles, player profiles, all that kind of stuff. The two big things I would just say that I'm spending a lot of time on. I'm doing a short YouTube, I guess it's a series. They're like 5 to 7 minute episodes that I call Pick 3 ADP, and I go round by round through current fantasy baseball drafts, and I give 3 players I like at their ADP or in that round. I give a stud option, the guy I think is like the best bet in that round. I give a sleeper, somebody who's kind of going overlooked in that round, and then just like a solid pick. And then I give one fade, so a player I'm fading at cost in each round. And then I will also chop those up and I put those on my Instagram, which is Samulski_sports. If you are on Instagram and want to just watch sports videos. And then bunch of articles coming out on Roto World, but the big one is the top 100 starting pitchers, which I said would come out this Wednesday. And then I'm sure Nick is laughing along with me that now that's going to come out next week because it just takes a while to really get the blurbs going. And now I have to make changes because of Burns and DL Hall and all this kind of stuff. So that's next week, and that will be coming out. And I've got a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, just check Twitter, and I'm posting as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, and you get a preview of that top 100, obviously, by listening to a recent On the Corner.
Yeah, and it's already
and then that's the beauty of doing it on air, if you will, and you get the criticism and the critiques from your cohort, and then you can take that to heart or not, and make adjustments before you actually put it in writing.
Yes.
So that's good. All right. Well, part of those rankings are revolving around ratios, as we typically have to worry about throughout the course of the season and during draft season. We're talking about ERA and WHIP in this situation are standard categories in a 5x5 roto or head-to-head categories leagues for that matter. And so, Kevin, I'm going to go back over to you though. First and foremost, very high level here. like how much are you actually focusing on these categories when you're looking at a pitcher, when you're regardless of what your strategy is to drafting pitchers, whether you're going, pocket aces or you're waiting 5 rounds or whatever case may be, like are the ratios more important than the volume categories or vice versa?
I don't even know if I know how I would answer which is more important. They're obviously both really important. For me personally, ratios may be more important during a draft than they are for others, because I will stream 2-start pitchers all season long. And I think that's the way to go. But in order for that to work, I need a better base. So I need to pay more attention to my ratios during the draft. If you're somebody that's adverse to streaming throughout the year, maybe you don't have to pay quite as close of attention during the draft, because overall they should be a little better to begin with. But for me, I need to kind of protect them a little bit because I will stream throughout the year.
Eric, as you're considering these picks throughout the course of your draft, we talked about this last year. I'm going to talk about it again here. Volume plays a big role in your ratios. I mean, we talk about on the hitter side with batting average, like obviously the more played up, more at bat you get, the bigger of a dent your average is going to have on your overall line. Same can be said about ERA and WHIP. Like the more innings you pitch, the bigger of a bump that makes. Is there something to be said about bumping up volume or bumping down volume based on what you're projecting a pitcher to put up in those ratios?
I would say it's very rare that I would bump down volume. I understand what you're saying, that like a pitcher who throws 170 innings and gets you a bad whip is going to throw you 170 innings of a bad whip, which is, that's worse. Though I would just say that like I'm probably shying away from drafting people with like objectively bad ratios anyway. So the volume, unless I'm in like some sort of draft and hold 50 round format, the volume for me is only a positive. However, as Nick and I have mentioned a few times on the podcast, I think that volume sometimes gets overrated in the sense that we look at volume as this secure thing. Oh, he goes deeper in games. He is a 180 inning workhorse, etc. And Nick had that tweet like way back in October about 15 of the top 31 pitchers being drafted who didn't even make 20 starts last year. I believe that was the criteria that he listed. It was basically just like almost 50% of the top 30 starters basically didn't meet value because they got hurt. And we are looking at a starting pitcher landscape right now that doesn't have a lot of the names we're used to seeing at the top. And so there are a lot of question marks beginning as early as like starting pitcher 5 for some people. And so I think there's a tendency to say, oh, I'll just bump up the guy that's throwing more innings because he's safer. But like, Nick and I spoke about like Logan Webb is a great example, right? Logan Webb threw over 200 innings last year. So it doesn't really matter if he is not a great like K per 9 guy, because he finished 18th among all starting pitchers in strikeouts because he threw over 200 innings and he gives you great ratios. But if you are drafting somebody solely on the basis of the fact that they accumulate stats, if they are then one of those pitchers that falls victim to injury, because that's a risk for all starting pitchers, then you're going to lose way more production because you only drafted that guy to be an accumulator. Now, I'm not suggesting that's Logan Webb. He's a guy I was using as an example. But what I'm saying is if your number one reason for drafting this guy is I'm going to get 190 innings, to me, I wouldn't bump that guy up as much as I would somebody who's going to give me value in other categories and also give me innings. And I may bump him up over somebody who maybe has more upside, but is more, a more volatile pitcher. So I know it's confusing. It's just like, I think it's relative. I don't want to look at volume as just, hey, everybody with volume I have to have.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I get that. I wonder, there's a lot of talk right now of like who's the number one. I mean, Nick's worrying about this as well. If you listen to his Plus Pitch podcast from the Yankees, he's talking about how Garrett Cole will probably be his number 2 instead of his number 1. But like you have all this other talk about, should Strider be your number 1 after the ERA that he put up, and whether or not that'll be repeated for 2024 is yet to be seen. You can just go by projections, go by your own history, but that kind of volume that Strider puts up, regardless of what his ERA could or was and could be, is outweighed by the fact that volume is going to bring in the number of strikeouts, the possibility of many wins being on Atlanta, and keeps him in the conversation, if not solidifies him as most people's number 1 pitcher, whether they're drafting or making lists or what have you. And so this goes into the idea of and we talked about this last episode, Kevin, as well, with like how much power do you need to get out of somebody in order to ignore the 0 that you're getting in stolen bases, and vice versa. Like it's the Escher Ruiz question. It's like, how many stolen bases does he actually have to make him valuable enough to draft when he's cutting into everything else? Strider's an enigma here to an extent because his volume is so high, and to an like his K per 9, whatever his K percent, whatever you want to look at, it doesn't matter. They're all super high, and if he can get close to 200 innings, then who knows what he could do again. Where is that cutoff though? And Eric, I'll let you keep this up, kind of keep rolling with this, but where is that kind of cutoff where they've got to give me X amount of volume, aka in this case, mostly strikeouts, if not wins as well, to kind of not ignore a poor ratio or a poor whip that you might be getting. But at least, maybe you just push it off to the side a little bit.
Yeah. I would say that like if I'm getting poor ratios, and I mean like poor ratios, like Strider didn't have great ratios last year, but like a 3.86 ERA doesn't kill you in this current climate. So you're not looking at like the 142 whip you got from Dylan Cease. Like that's much harder to overcome. And so that's why you'll see Dylan Cease like really far down on a lot of people's draft lists, or at least mine and Nick's, is like, I might get 170 innings, but like if I get 170 innings of a 1.4 whip, like that really, really hurts me. So I think and the answer to your question is I would prefer volume from the guys I have early, right? Like I prefer volume from, my top 2 or 3 starting pitchers. However, there's always a point, and it's different for each pitcher, where like I'm willing to say, you know what? I may only get 130 innings of Tyler Glasnow, but at some point, those 130 innings of Tyler Glasnow I'm just happier taking that than I am taking what I'm going to get from Tarek Skubal, because I don't know what I'm going to get. And I might get 160 innings, but I might not. Or I'll gladly take what I get from Tyler Glasnow over Freddie Peralta, because maybe Peralta throws 30 more innings, but maybe not. But I know when Glasnow's on the mound, it's going to be really good value. And I'm way more comfortable bumping that up. Like once I get to like the 4th starting pitcher I'm drafting on my team, like you'll see when I do post my rankings, like outside of the top 30, I have a lot of guys like say Chris Sale, who I currently have 30 ranked starting pitcher 32, because Chris Sale was much better than people thought last year. And I know there's innings concerns, but I like what I'm going to get out of him, and I'm going to take what I believe will be solid ratios and good strikeouts. And if I don't get the volume with that, then I'll find volume somewhere else. And I'm even more leaning into that if I'm in a league that has IL spots, because obviously if it's an injury, I put that pitcher on the IL, I pick up somebody to replace him. And yes, I'm not getting the same level of production, but maybe that streamer combined with Sale is still better than the person I would have drafted for strictly volume after that.
Kevin, I'm going to throw you a curveball here because I didn't write this on the outline, but how does any strategy change when you change formats when it comes to ratios? And specifically, I think I can speak for all of us that all of our conversations so far has been revolving around a roto league, a season-long roto league, where that 142 whip is going to that stretch out the old course of the season. But of course, that plays differently in a head-to-head league where you only are going to get the good, the bad in that week. In that one start, maybe you get a 2-start week. In daily moves versus weekly moves, et cetera, do you think that these ratios play less of a role in your consideration in these smaller sample sizes where you have a little bit more flexibility whether or not you're going to bench somebody or you can stream somebody specifically to kind of combat a bad start, bad ratios in a week-long period?
No, I think the biggest difference is in the leagues where you can make decisions later in the week when you have more information, right? If things are going one way, it's like, I don't care how bad his ratios are. I might as well throw him out there and try to get a win, a few strikeouts, right? The opposite can be true. Oh, this is tighter than I thought. Maybe I want to protect these ratios. Yeah, the later in the week, the later we can make a decision, the better, and the more informed decision we can make. But in general, that's the biggest thing for me, that there are some things that are more, I think, pertinent due to format, but I think it's really, I think it's getting really nitpicky, and it can get us in trouble as many times as it can help us. I think in general, you make the decision as late as possible as you can make it. But as far as whether or not I'm going to make a risky lineup change that is putting my ratios in jeopardy, I'm probably making that decision roughly the same depending on the size of the league and the format. But the later I can make the decision with the more information, the better, for sure.
Yeah, in your typical head-to-head league where you have 12 active members of the league, you don't really have that luxury of like wondering, oh, should I save my ratios? Because usually those volume categories are usually neck and neck, unless you're in a dynasty league and you're obviously fighting somebody that's in a rebuild mode or whatever, and you have a little bit more luxury there. But in most situations, it's a nice luxury to have if you can find yourself in it, but it doesn't happen throughout the course of the season. All right.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say that I want my ratios to start the week off bad, but it is kind of nice when you're sitting there like, oh yeah, no, it doesn't matter. Just throw them in there.
Use all my ads on pitchers. I'll get all the volume because I don't care what'll happen.
Exactly.
Anything can still happen though. But yeah, I get the sentiment. All right. Well, we got.
Before we get to, I just want to point this out real quick before we get to like specific pitchers, because I had to do this for an article in the off season, just so people understand the ratio landscape we're in right now. I know that, the process, the Tanner Bell and Jeff Zimmerman magazine has made it really popular to like shoot for the 80th percentile benchmark if you're in a roto league, right? So the idea for that is if you're trying to get an 80th percentile number in every category, you're more likely to build a well-rounded team and have a great roto team. So in 12 team leagues, going into last year's drafts, the 80th percentile ERA was 3.26 and the 80th percentile whip was 1.12. This year, going into 12 team drafts, the 80th percentile ERA is 3.72 and the 80th percentile whip is 119. Last year in 15 team leagues, the 80th percentile ERA was 3.38, and this year, and with a 1.14 whip, and this year the 80th percentile ERA is 3.83 with a 1.21 whip. So ratios have, I mean, it's huge, right? In part, it's the banning of the shift. There's also some, talk about the baseball, which we never know about. Also, the stolen bases are a huge thing because the more batters that turn singles into doubles and triples means the more singles that lead to runs, all that kind of stuff we understand, right? And so this is where, like, when we're talking about you need to prioritize ratios, it's that it gets ugly. And that's also where I said a 3.86 ERA from Spencer Strider is still basically almost 80th percentile, right? So it's really not terrible. And that's where Kevin talked about wanting to stream. And it's like, streaming is a totally viable strategy. But that's why Kevin said you want to make sure you build a solid base, because if 80th percentile ratios is a 3.83 ERA and a 121 whip, then if you're streaming from a pool of guys who are not drafted, the vast majority of those guys are going to give you way worse ratios than that, unless you really kind of like nail it each time you're kind of predicting who you want to take. And so that's where it's like you're really playing with fire, and it still remains a viable strategy, but it remains a viable strategy if you have the foundation of a rotation that can take the hit on the chin if you get a 7 ERA from your streaming pitchers that week. You want to make sure that you don't also have a 4.5 ERA from just your baseline starters, and 1-2 whip from your baseline starters, because then you kind of can't come back from that in a roto league if you're doing that multiple weeks in a row
throughout the course of the entire season. And this is going the same way that we're talking about with batting average. It's like, at one point we talked about, if you have a guy who's hitting you 230, 240, oh man, that's going to really sink you. Nowadays, 230, I mean, it's just not going to hurt you. It's not helping you, but it's no longer hurting you, just because the way of, batting average. If we start seeing this trend continue, Eric, that you're pointing out, like those are big swings in 80th percentile ratios that we're seeing. And, of course you bring in, Strider, because we talked about him earlier, and you hear his ERA is still going to be right around 80th percentile, even though everybody's saying like, oh man, I can't believe I got that ratio from, my SP1. That was terrible. But you know what? It's still 80th percent. It's still helping you.
Right. And he also gave you a well above average whip.
Everything.
And I think that's the thing. Like, you had what I thought was a really good question on the rundown, which I just wanted to touch on, which is like, why does it seem like people don't only talk about ERA when they talk about ratios? And to me, I think it's twofold, right? One is whip is really hard to figure out, so people don't talk about it as much, right? Like,
sure.
How is it possible that Blake Snell had a 119 whip when he walked over 13% of his batters? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? And the answer to it, if you really go into the detail, is like, he got batters on base, and then he basically was like outrageously above average at then limiting any and all contact once runners were on base. So he walked so many guys, but then nobody basically advanced beyond that, which made the whip kind of like settle down. But that's harder to kind of like figure out than like, this guy misses a lot of bats, which means there's going to be a lot of strikeouts, or this guy doesn't allow a lot of runs, which means the ERA is going to be low. Mm-hmm. So we kind of ignore it. And I think the other reason is that whip is associated with control. Right? Like, we think, oh, whip means I don't give up free bases. So whip is like, your Kyle Hendrickses and whatever. Like that, I think, is where people's brains go. And so whip, I think, then gets associated with boring, right? Whip is like those boring guys who don't really throw hard. They don't strike out, but they don't really give up, a lot of hits and runs. And so whip is like not an exciting stat. It's like a boring pitcher stat. But I think that's, if you obviously look at whip leaders every single year, that's an overcorrection, because a lot of your whip leaders are guys who just don't allow a lot of hits, right? They're guys like Garrett Cole, who led baseball in whip last year and is obviously still a strikeout pitcher. And yes, you have Zach Eflin and George Kirby right after him, and I guess they would technically be quote unquote like more boring. But your top 10 is still has guys like Luis Castillo and Wheeler and Strider and, Burns and pitchers like that. So I just think we think about our associations with WHIP are maybe hurting us in thinking about WHIP as a ratio stat as well. And then the complicated nature of it.
Yeah, I've also kind of always associated the fact that you don't talk about WHIP because when it comes down to like when you look at a leaderboard or you look at whether it's in a draft or postseason leaderboards, the range that you're looking at that number is a lot tighter than when you're seeing the range of ERA or like somebody who gets you a lot of strikeouts is going to get you have like this number, like it has to be 200, like anything over 200 strikeouts is a quote lot of strikeouts. WHIP, I don't feel like everybody really understands what is anything above a 119 is a bad WHIP or whatever,
right?
And it's going to be different in every league and every format.
Always changing,
yeah.
Right. Eric just told us the 80th percentile WHIP going into this coming season is over 119.
Right,
is 80th percentile. Right. Most people would tell you a 1.20 is bad. 1.20 was nearly 80th percentile coming into this season. So it's moving. So that's the other reason we don't know what's the number we're looking for.
Right. And that's where you have to think about it is like, that's for your team. Right. So that's why, like, I know that Nick and I in particular are lower on Kevin Gossman than like some of the other outlets out there. And that's because like Gossman continuously runs a high WHIP, and you can listen to all of Nick's podcasts and read my articles to figure out like the nuances of why. But like if you're getting a 118, 119 WHIP right off the bat from your ace, and that is theoretically your best pitcher, it's going to be hard to make sure you hit that 80th percentile WHIP when you think that the rest of the pitchers you're getting are probably going to be inferior in terms of the quality that they're giving. And that's where you really need to think about, like, yes, it looks like the number between like George Kirby's 104 WHIP and Kevin Gossman's 118 WHIP, like it's 0.14. Like how big could that really be? But like with WHIP, 0.14 is way different than 0.14 in ERA, right? Like a 3.14 ERA and a 3.28 ERA are not really that different. But a 3.04 WHIP and a 3.04 WHIP would be atrocious. Don't draft that pitcher. But a 1.04 WHIP and a 1.18 WHIP has a massive difference.
Yeah.
And so you really need to pay attention to the small difference in those numbers, way more in WHIP than you do in ERA.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was more my initial point was going with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, when you're streaming, don't pay attention to the ratios for that single game. They don't matter, right? Eric mentioned a 7 ERA from a streamer earlier. I'll take a 7 ERA from a streamer every single time.
Well,
it means he gave up 2 runs in the first 3 innings, right? Which is nothing. Or he's stuck in there for 5 innings and gave up 4 runs. That's over a 7 ERA. 4 runs in 5 innings. I have a chance for a win, possibly. 5 innings. I probably got some strikeouts. I'll take a 7 ERA from a streamer every single time. What you don't want is your pitchers that you're relying on to give you that 7 ERA, right? When you're streaming somebody, that's your 6th or 7th starter, maybe even 8th if you're throwing somebody in there, your relievers don't have good matchups or your punting saves, right? So looking at single game ratios is worthless and in fact can lead you to make bad decisions.
Yeah, I mean, this goes into the point of volume that we were talking about earlier, and like a 200 inning sample is going to affect your overall ratios a whole lot more than a 3 inning sample, as you're kind of pointing out, Kevin. That 7 ERA in a 3 inning sample isn't doing a whole lot. I don't know if I can get behind every single stream being 7 ERA, but I think I get where you're going with that.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we need to talk about some actual players that we are looking at, and we typically do this in the realm of our final draft pick or our final 2 draft picks in a 12-teamer. So we're talking about ADP of like 325 or later at least in your 12-teamers. We are going to get to some of those picks right after this quick break.
When it comes to teaching kids and teens about money, practice makes perfect. That's where Greenlight comes in. With a debit card and money app of their own, kids learn to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest. Parents send instant money transfers, create custom chores, and automate allowance, while kids track their spending, set savings goals, and practice money skills they can use today and for life. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
Have you found the keys to unlock your best trip? On a Trafalgar tour, you unlock more than just the world. We give you the keys to discover real connections and one-of-a-kind experiences. It all starts with expert itineraries where everything is taken care of. With Trafalgar, your money goes further, and so do you. Unlock your best self. Discover more at Trafalgar.com/unlock. That's TRAFALGAR.com/unlock.
All right, like I said, we're going to talk about a couple players that you guys are looking at if you are focused solely on ERA and WHIP with your last 1 or 2 picks in a draft. And I would venture to guess this is not something you're necessarily thinking about with that last pick, especially in a fab league. You're using... I mean, we talk about this all the time, Kevin. It's like you're using those 1 or last 2 picks on guys that might get extra volume in the first week of the season because of their schedule. They have some really good matchups or what have you, but you can still use those attributes into these picks that we're making, whether they are short term, and these are pitchers that you're picking with your last pick. You're not exactly assuming they're going to be on your roster all season long in most cases. But again, maybe you did a poor job of balancing out your base with those ratios, and you need to chip away at them at the very beginning. You don't have to chip away at ratios only in August and September. You don't have to wait that long. You can start chipping away at them in April as well. So I'm gonna ask you guys to each give me 2 starting pitchers that can help you out in either or both ratios. And then also a reliever you might be considering to, again, maybe you think they're going to get a couple extra innings in that first week, and thus, a good solid reliever has a better chance of putting up, a 0 ERA and a 1 WHIP or sub 1 WHIP in 4 innings in the first week than a streaming starter in pretty much any format. So these are things to think about as you guys were picking them. And luckily we have names up here already, so you don't have to think too much of it right now. So no changing answers anyway. But Eric, I'll let you start it off here with your first starting pitcher that again, they should be going after ADP of 325 in online championships. That was kind of what we were looking at. These are 12-teamers on the NFBC platform. And so that's just where we're using as a baseline. But these guys are going to have similar, ADPs in your other formats as well.
Yeah, so I will say that I do love to chase strikeout upside with these final picks, as you mentioned. So this wouldn't necessarily be my strategy all the time. However, I do like what these 2 guys that I picked bring. The first pick is Garrett Whitlock, who's going 399 in online championships. He's actually going. I think he's only actually been drafted. I'm looking at this because online championships obviously don't go this deep. So he has been drafted in 1 current online championship.
Yep. Perfect.
So great. But so as of right now, the Red Sox don't seem like they're going to add another starting pitcher. They will go into spring with Whitlock and Tanner Houck battling for the 5th spot in the rotation, and Josh Winkowski. But I think it's really Whitlock and Tanner Houck. I have spoken at length again on the Corner podcast about how I believe that that Whitlock is a better bet as a full-time starter, and Houck is better as a reliever. I'm willing to throw last year kind of out the window for Whitlock. He battled multiple injuries. He was a starter. He was a reliever. He was a multi-inning reliever. He was a 1-year reliever. He kind of just got yo-yoed around. And also in addition to that, he had changed his slider to be He had started throwing a sweeper, which did one thing great and missed a ton of bats, and he also couldn't throw it for a strike. And I think part of that is like, okay, I have a new pitch. Oh, I'm pitching some. Now I'm hurt. Now I'm pitching in a new role. Now I'm pitching this. Now I'm taking a week off. Now I'm taking a month off. And so obviously when you're trying to get comfort with a new pitch and you're not consistently throwing, it's going to make it harder for you to have comfort with that new pitch. So I do think that the command of the sweeper will be better going into next year. It had a 21.8% swing strike rate. So I do like that. Whitlock is a changeup sinker pitcher primarily, so everything is down, and that's again something I like because that's usually when things are going well. More ground balls mean less authoritative and meaningfully hard contact, and obviously if you're giving up like fewer home runs and doubles and triples or whatever, your ratios are probably going to be better. And we've just seen Whitlock be a really effective starter in the past. And even though we've only seen it in short spurts, I think that if he wins the rotation spot, there's a chance that he's like a mid-3 ERA pitcher with a sub 1.2 whip, and you're getting him pick 400. And another reason I like this pick is because if he doesn't win the rotation spot, you're just moving on to somebody else.
I think that that's true, but I also think that if he doesn't win the rotation spot, and they don't trade Kenley Jansen and he doesn't become like the closer, he very well could still get you a couple of innings in that first series where,
for sure,
in a short sample size, he's still going to get you. He's still going to help. He might help your ERA and WHIP even more so.
Yes. And especially if you're focusing on the first series, right? He is being built up as a starter. And we know that starter workloads are limited early in the year. So there's a likelihood that the Red Sox wouldn't push many of their starters past 5 innings or 6 innings in their first start. And if Whitlock is built up as a starter and then starts the year in the bullpen, he could very well get a 2 or 3 inning appearance out of the gate in that first series. And as you just mentioned, that could be a meaningful appearance for you before everything settles into the normal routine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The only pitcher that I see getting normal workloads anytime in April on the Red Sox rotation is Giolito.
Right, that's what he's there for.
Yeah, that's
just
literally
throw a bunch of innings.
Unless they make the mistake of pitching him on Marathon Monday, which obviously the White Sox did, and that did not work out well. He is not a morning person. All right, Kevin, who's your first pitcher on your starting pitcher on your list that you're looking at in the final round of a 12-teamer?
Yeah, we talked about JP Sears a couple of weeks ago when Kyle Bland joined us, and I've only grown to become more and more excited about drafting JP Sears over the past couple of weeks. And not much has changed. That I haven't found much more than what we talked about with Kyle a couple of weeks ago. But, he was 24th starting pitcher in overall POV for 2023. He's being drafted as the 140 something starting or overall pitcher off the board. And Kyle's projections have him right just inside the top 60 pitchers overall, including relievers. So like you brought up when we talked about him a couple of weeks ago, about 45 or 50 for SP, and going way outside of that. And that's when it gets to this point in a draft. This is all I need. I mean, the POV projections have him at under a 4 ERA when we're talking about guys not even being drafted in nearly half of the online championships. Right around a 4 ERA or even under it is actually really good. They have him at a better than 80th percentile whip coming into 2024. And when we talked about him a couple of weeks ago, the thing I wasn't buying that the POV projections had him for was 12 wins, but both Steamer and the Bat have him for 9. They're getting him up there close to that double digits. If he hits double digit wins, he is going to out earn his draft position by a lot. And like we've talked about a couple of weeks ago, and again a little bit now, the POV projections actually have him for much better than those 9 wins. But even just getting to there and he is easily outperforming his draft cost. So I have grown to become a big fan of JP Sears over the past couple of weeks.
All right. When we do our wins and strikeouts, you're not allowed to pick JP Sears again, Kevin. I'm just making a note. You can't double dip here. You got to pick somebody different, because I'm sure his ADP is not going to change. He will still be an option by the time we get to that episode. All right, right back to you. You can go in either direction here, Eric. If you want to touch on your reliever, or you want your second starter, whichever way you want to go.
Yeah, I'll finish out the starters, and it's Matt Manning. And Matt Manning is somebody who I was not super into, primarily because he doesn't strike anybody out, and I was like, oh, that's boring. And as I've talked to Nick more and more, I've come to accept there are certain things that Matt Manning does well, that you might want on your team. Ratios seems to be one of them. So he had a really rough MLB debut in 2021. Since then, he's only made 28 total starts between 2022 and 2023. But the ratios have been great. It was a 3.43 ERA and 1.17 WHIP in 2022, and then a 3.58 ERA and 1.04 WHIP last year. And we're talking about a guy going pick 393 right now. So if you want ratios around pick 400, there's probably no better bet. He remains much younger than I think. He's 26 years old. There was a lot of helium on him as a prospect because of his build, because of his pitch mix, primarily four-seam fastball and slider focused. That slider, which Ben Palmer actually tweeted out about earlier in the day, that slider is has the highest PLV among all sliders. And the third highest PLV among all pitches. So that's obviously something you might want to hang your hat on. I don't necessarily think that's going to all of a sudden turn him into a strikeout pitcher, but I think having really good off-speed pitches and having, the ability to kind of command them and put them where you want will limit the hard contact and help your ratios, which he has done well so far in his career. He's currently slotted into the Tigers rotation. I believe he'll pitch in it as long as he's healthy. And so I think he's a good bet for ratios late in drafts. Probably more of a 15-teamer option for me because I think he lacks that real ceiling upside, but could be somebody that you keep in your 15-team lineup for a while just because he doesn't do anything that hurts you.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Kevin, moving on to your final starter. Stay in the category here. Again, final pick, helping your ratios in your 12-teamers. Who you got?
Yeah, I think people are kind of forgetting about Logan Allen a little bit. I like him in this spot. He's going right around pick 350 on average. It's hard to tell, though. He's only been drafted in 5 of the 12 online championships that have taken place. But as early as 283, as late as 344, they give his average is actually higher than that because of all the drafts he hasn't been drafted in. That's what I mean about kind of hard to tell what an average draft position would be here for Logan Allen. And a word of caution, and we've been talking about it a little bit, and Eric brought it up first, that we, typically we're concentrating on ERA for some reason when we're looking at ratios, and ERA is only half of the ratios pitchers give us. His whip can be a little high. In fact, the PLV projections have been projected for a 1.28 whip. That's not great. In fact, that can do some damage to our team. So we do have to be a little careful here. And he got that walk rate down under 10% for the major league portion of his 2023 season. We need to continue to see that and hopefully even continue to see some improvement on that. The projections, they got him going slightly lower than what we saw at the MLB level. So that should help. And other than that slight concern, love Logan Allen where he's being drafted, fully confident he's going to be in the Guardians rotation and keep that spot as long as he stays healthy. And we can say that about any pitcher these days.
All right. Well, like I said, there's always opportunity to chip away at your ratios, even little by little. We do this a lot in August, in September specifically, by streaming relievers, whether it be middle relievers or guys that are getting multiple innings late in games. So I'm going to make you guys pick a reliever here as well that kind of fits the bill and chip away at your ratios in April instead. Kevin, I'm going to have you flow right into this one as well. Maybe just because you left this blank on the outline, and I'm so curious to see who you actually picked. And also, this is just, we talk about this every single week.
Right. I think it's because the last couple of weeks of our news and notes, as we've been talking about a lot of these guys. That's why it's blank. I had David Robertson typed in the spot earlier. We talked about him earlier in the show. I thought about Will Smith in Kansas City. We've talked a lot about him this offseason. Aroldis Chapman, we talked about him last week because he signed with Pittsburgh. Because it's ratios, I did settle on Brusdar Graterol out in LA. As great as he has been, and amazing relief pitcher for the Dodgers, he doesn't strike many guys out, so we don't talk about him much. When we're talking about some guys we like as middle relievers, maybe snagging a win or snagging a save for us, we're typically concentrating on guys that in the limited number of innings they are giving us, hopefully they're striking out 2 or 3 guys each inning. So we're adding to that total. We're not going to get that from Graterol, but we are going to get the ratios. And we are going to get those opportunities for snagging wins, snagging saves with that offensive lineup, with the starting rotation and other relievers that the Dodgers have. So, I mean, you can do a lot worse than having Brusdar Graterol in your lineup for 4, 5, 6 innings in a week.
Yeah, I think that the volume for this play, we're specifically talking ratios here. The volume definitely is going to play. And the volume doesn't have to necessarily come in multi-inning appearances. It can come in multiple appearances. And if you have a guy that, the manager or the team itself is going to rely on, especially early on in the season, Eric, as you talked about, like the starters' workloads aren't, the bullpens are going to get hit a lot more often in April as they might throughout the course of the regular season, just because their starters aren't as built up yet as well. So relief pitchers in this scenario is definitely a viable option. So Eric, close this out here, pun completely intended, and give me a reliever for your ratios.
Yeah, I feel bad because I misunderstood the assignment in a sense of like I feel like I should have picked a multi-inning guy. I will say I picked Jason Adam, which is partially cheating because he's exactly 325 and you told me to pick somebody drafted after 325. But Jason Adam has been continuously really good since coming over to Tampa Bay. They changed his pitch mix because, again, that's what Tampa Bay does, and they made him just a far more dynamic pitcher. I think that, he is consistently used out of the back of their bullpen. So I think that if you're not going to get a multi-inning guy, I think you're going to get somebody who's going to throw multiple times within that first week. He threw 67. He made 67 appearances in 2022 and 56 last year while dealing with injury. The ERA and the WHIP have been really great since coming over to Tampa. He also gets you strikeouts, and then he could also get you a save because even though Fairbanks is the closer, we know that Tampa's not going to run Fairbanks into the ground, in particular early in the year. So if there are multiple save opportunities early in the year, Adam could get another shot. And then just to throw a name out there, but if you are looking for a multi-inning guy, I also like Matt Strahm with the Phillies. I think that he's been a really impactful reliever since moving into the bullpen. And if you're looking for just a multi-inning type of arm, I think that he's another guy who will get you strikeouts, but could also give you a low 3 ERA and, something like a 1.13, 1.14 whip, but good whip early in the year as well.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a reason why not only Adam has that ADP that you talked about, but he is, of everybody you guys have mentioned, he's the only one that's been drafted in all 12 online championships. Not only because he's going to be valuable in other categories potentially, but he's and Chris Torres and Mike Carter over on the Fantasy Baseball Beat just talked about this. He's the clear handcuff for Fairbanks for exactly the reasons, Eric, that you just mentioned. Obviously, Tampa's not going to want to, Joel Fairbanks into the ground early on, but on top of that, Fairbanks can find his own ways of getting injured, and hopefully that's not the case, but he has in the past. So, he'll be valuable in other ways. And Adam, even if he doesn't pick up a bunch of saves, he's just that type of reliever who's still going to get utilized enough throughout the course of the season that you may not drop him even in a 12-teamer just because of the value he provides as somebody that's just a reliable innings eater from a reliever standpoint that you can punch in when you don't like any of the streamer options on the free agent, or you just got hit with a bunch of injuries from the rest of your pitching staff and can't really afford to pick up a big name pitcher off the waiver wire. So still definitely a valid call out here.
Or you'll do what I did last year and drop Adam, and then Fairbanks will get hurt like 2 days later.
You let us know when you do that, so that
I will. I'll let you know. Yeah.
I would appreciate the heads up. All right. Well, I think those are definitely plenty. This is not a strategy that I think a lot of people think about, whether for good reason or not. That's up to you to decide after listening to everything we had to say here. But now you've got a couple of names that if you decide this is what your roster needs at the end of your draft, that you can at least put them on your watch, just put them in your queue and pull the trigger on them if it just feels right. So consider all those names at the end of your drafts. That is going to wrap it up, though. Kevin, close us out here with any other extra words of wisdom that you might have for those who are still in draft season, just starting draft season, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, first to get us started, for anybody that thought we were going to talk late round pitchers, and specifically late round pitchers that can help our ratios, and I wasn't going to bring up Wade Miley. There's a guy going well after pick 325, only been drafted in 3 out of 12 of the online championships that gave us 120 innings of a 3.14 ERA and 1.14 whip last year. I'm just saying. And then a lot of more and more projection systems coming out every day. And we love this. And I talk often in the off season and throughout the season about being careful not to cherry pick certain stats from individual players from one projection system. That can get us in a little bit of trouble. Trust an entire system. However, I briefly allude to this at time, but the outliers is where we can find things as well, especially if the one projection system is way different than several others on a player, and you can figure out why. If you figure out why, whether it's good direction or bad direction, that may lead you into actually believing in that outlier projection a little bit and can be a big value. So it's a little hypocritical, as I am often talking different things, fantasy baseball. But if you are going to pick one projection system that has a much different thought on a player, make sure you at least think why and believe in that, if that's the route you're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to know what goes into a projection system. And there
only knew that.
Yeah, there are some articles out there that at least give you like a microcosm of what is thought to go into the into each projection system. But do whatever research you can, find whatever things you can to read on that, and make sure you kind of know the tools that you're using as well. All right. But that is going to wrap it up for episode 149 of On the Wire. Eric, thank you so much for making it 3 episodes in a row, or 3 podcasts in a row on the Pitcher List Network, where you either crossed or came very, very close to the 2-hour mark. And yeah, make sure that you're following everything that Eric does. Like he said, he posts everything on his Twitter at Samulski NYC. There'll be a link to that in the show description. Eric, again, yeah, thanks for taking the time, man.
Thanks for having me. If we wrap this up in 3 minutes, it'll be out before 2 hours, and then it's a win for me.
There you go. All right. Well, you can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grid. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin. Of course, follow the pod itself at On The Wire Pod. Once again, thank Eric Samulski for joining us. And you can catch him not only on the Twitter, but also all of us in the PL Discord by signing up for PL Plus or PL Pro at petrolist.com. After all that, I am Adam Howe. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.
Hey parents, Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list, teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.